Hi, this is Joel Blackstock. Welcome to the Taproot Therapy Collective podcast. This is part 2 in our ongoing series, The Psychology of Architecture. In our Psychology of series, we focus on the psychology of different professions, like fine arts and music. We hope to feature in some upcoming series. Part 2 of The Psychology of Architecture is an interview with André Duany. Mr. Duany is an award-winning urban planner and architect. He designed, among 300 other towns that his firm worked on, Seaside, Florida, and Kentlands, Maryland. He is also the award-winning author of Suburban Nation, The Rise of Sprawl and the Decline of the American Dream. I hope you find the interview with him interesting. As always, not all of the views of our guests represent the views of Taproot Therapy Collective, but we very much appreciate Mr. Duany sitting down with us because he is an accomplished and ingenious individual. Mr. Duany is one of the founders of New Urbanism, a movement in urban planning that seeks to restore the design of cities to the way that people will actually live and interact, to design walkable and community spaces, and to design spaces that foster community and connection. Please bear in mind I was connecting with Mr. Duany while both of us were traveling, and this interview took place after 5 other methods of communication failed, and I had to put a tape recorder next to a cell phone on speakerphone in order to conduct the interview at all. So bear that in mind. Here's the interview, and thank you so much for listening. Just to start, you've written and talked a lot, and I don't want to make you recap anything that's already out there that you've said, but the purpose of this is for people who may not be coming from an urban design or architecture background. And so maybe just a little bit of summary that helps them understand the kind of fusion of architecture and urban design and community planning that you do. Because the thing that made me interested in when we were doing the Psychology of series and wanted to talk to you is I was a kid in the 80s, and I remember coming to Seaside, and I just felt so powerful when I was here. And it was because the community was laid out, almost at child height, for pedestrians and not for cars. And there were little architectural follies and little paths that I could go through in the woods. And I just felt this magic, and I think the psychology of something like this is interesting, and it's not something that you get into a ton in your talks, or, usually the people you're talking to are pretty technical, pretty professional.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense, or if you want to just take it from there.
That's a very good introduction. A couple of things about what you said. We used to say at Seaside that if we designed a place in which dogs could go out safely all day, we would have succeeded. That was a kind of reality. Robert Davis had a dog called Budweiser who lived 20 without a leash, and he had the run of the town. He was very popular. Where to get tidbits, he had friends everywhere, and of course, dogs are not, they wouldn't survive half a day in an American suburbia, with the traffic. So that was a test. But the other test, the one you're referring to, is 50% of Americans, one way or another, don't have a car. They're too young to drive, too old to drive, or too poor to have a car. So we have a situation in which we're so incredibly concerned about accessibility, the accessibility of the handicapped and so forth. And in fact, when they can't even get to the ramp in the first place, you install McDonald's, well, how do you get there in the first place? So there's vast missing misunderstanding of what goes on. And whenever there are people who cannot normally drive, are dependent on their parents, the famous soccer mom, and they have one taste of Seaside as young kids, or one taste of Paris as older people, where they run around on their own, it's absolutely exhilarating. And it's stunning because they don't realize how constrained they are. The public realm in America is designed by engineers. They think they're just designing roads for vehicles, but they're in fact designing the public realm. and they do not take into account the ability of people to get around. Because they think, well, I provide ramps at the corners and red lights and green lights. That doesn't mean the kids can get anywhere. So this is something I haven't spoken about in a long time, but it is in fact one of the great canary in the mine shaft tests. Like, can you give your kid $10 and say, "See you at dinner"? You see, and it is, and the word you use, which is empowering, is precisely the word. So it's nice that you remember that. Now, there are kids that were born at Seaside now that are 35 years old. They've been in school, and they have the same. They're really, really mentally agile.
Yeah,
they're different from the other kids. They've been from the beginning.
Sure,
it's very, very good to them to have had that experience.
Yeah, I do think that the way that the spaces we inhabit affect us does change society. I mean, urban planning is probably a discipline you don't think of when you think of politics, but then when you get underneath politics, when you get underneath, economy, like a lot, it's driving the way that we live, consume, think, and I think go ahead.
It's readily observable. Okay, like you just out and see it. Now in France, you walk out and see it. The kids are running free. Okay, but with that, and that's how we came up with all these ideas 35 years ago. Now these days, people want you to do a study. They say, "What statistics do you have? What are your metrics?" And it used to be human observation, which was good enough for 10,000 years.
I'm suspicious of that kind of academia. I think that when you're saying, well, we need to do a study, what you're really saying is we don't want to do that. And we're going to get lost in the numbers so that we don't have to pay for it,
There's also, which is, it means that they want to disempower you because you're a person in practice, which is threatening to them. And they want it to be reset. So it's their method that is used. And I've fought it like a maniac for the last 10 years. I mean, just violently. I can't, why should I do a study for something that's readily observable?
Yeah.
I just stand next there and watch.
That the sky is blue,
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is one of the additional things that are making things more difficult rather than less. And there's another thing, by the way. There are studies. I could give you 3 books. Absolutely. But nobody reads them.
Yeah.
And because there's another, the studies are just deep six in the libraries. So in the end, no, I will not do a study. Because first of all, it's perfectly obvious. Second of all, I want to make it operational, not a study per se as an end.
Yeah.
And third of all, to read it anyway. It's a very weak system to write it down.
Sure.
I think Seaside as a propaganda machine in which people get to live it and experience it and remembering it is much, much better than putting it in print.
Well, a lot of the psychology at Taproot is Jungian. I mean, Carl Jung's ideas kind of flared up really big in the 60s and 70s. Everything becomes more cognitive and ego-driven and self-helpy. Insurance wants quicker fixes in the 80s. Now, because of the trauma and brain-based medicine movement, a lot of that stuff's coming back. I mean, I think, do you feel like there are certain designs, certain ways of interacting with space that we're like, that are archetypal, that we've evolved to need, that we kind of forget about when we design sometimes? I mean, you see trends kind of pop up across society, and it's shiny and it's new, and then we forget about it and it's old and dated. But the things that are timeless tend to look the same,
Yeah, no, I completely. But there's one, yes, before I get to that, I want to say one thing. The studies have been done. There are perfectly good books, some spectacularly good books that actually not only explain, but teach you how to do it, and also spectacularly good books about crime. Not just that life gets better when you design space a certain way, but crime goes down, bad things go down. Isolation, the isolation of older people. Yeah. It just goes drastically down. But there's a disconnect between the studies. First of all, there's the obvious. You observe, observable empirical evidence. Then there are the studies, right? And then there's the delivery system, which is the studies do not get delivered to the people with the levers, right, to design cities, let alone the politicians. Now, there are politicians that on a one-to-one discussion can understand this and get very sophisticated about it, because after all, they're humans, and humans have experienced, all of them, have experienced walkable, sociable spaces and unwalkable, unsociable spaces. So it's not like, this is not something like a scientific formula in somebody's drawer. Everybody has experienced good and bad urbanism. They all have. And so you can alert them very easily to what the issues are, very easily. And actually, you can do it in their office. You don't even have to take a walk with them, right? Mm-hmm. The problem that they have a very low opinion of, in the political discourse, of the ability of people to grasp these things. And so they oversimplify it, drastically. And what happens, for example, we've had very good connections. Al Gore knows exactly what we're talking about. Bill McKibben knows exactly what we're talking about. They know very well what we're talking about. And then when they run for office and write a book, they think it is a trifle too difficult to explain. They want to have the bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, urban planning is not difficult. After all, it's been done for thousands of years by quasi-illiterate people. The profession is very young. It's been done very well by people who were not particularly literate or intelligent. So it's not, but it's not nothing. Okay, you can't reduce it to a bumper sticker. And that's the problem. Like, for example, well, zoning is bad because it excludes people. Well, that's a bumper sticker. Okay, gentrification, talk about a bumper sticker. Now, there's something about gentrification to say right away. 95% of American cities could use nothing more than gentrification. That's what they need. They need a tax base. There are 5% of American cities that are suffering from gentrification, but there's 10 cities in this country that need it, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you take it down to one thing, and you get people coming up to me and to all of us who don't know anything and say, well, the single most important thing about urbanism is gentrification. And I don't think the politicians are wrong. I do think that their instinct that it's beyond their ken, that it's a little bit too complicated, right? To state it in a bumper sticker, to make it a campaign slogan. They are correct about that. But on the other hand, all of us who are new urbanists, time and again in public process, public participation, by taking care, right, to make the case, the pickup is extraordinary. It's just that you can't dumb it down the way the politics today demands.
Well, and I think one of the things that you said that is a pretty brilliant conceptualization somewhere, I don't remember why you said it, is that when you're designing the city, you're having a trade-off between public and personal space. And something like Paris, the apartments are tiny and dark, but everything is public life. You go out to the cafe and everything is public. And then somewhere like where I'm from, Hoover, Alabama, there's no public space at all. It's highways and strip malls and title loan stores. But then you go home and you've got your huge plot of land, and your McMansion and the grass. And that we traded all of the public space for private space. I mean, exactly. There's a pull that I would argue comes from trauma, cultural trauma and people that are living in more fear, more of a fight or flight reaction, becoming atomized, becoming individual, and pushing the public sphere away, distrusting any kind of communal interaction, any kind of shared power. That we've kind of been pushed into. And so you see design trending, one way, through the 80s. I don't know if that's the way that you see it or what you were meaning with that point, but.
Well, the thing to do is to find a balance. Like, for example, I do think that when you visit these Paris apartments, or even where I am here in France, Uzès, it really is, extremely unpleasant. Okay, various spaces. And the McMansions are awesome once you get inside. But for example, there are American cities, such as I think the clearest example is Charleston, in to the balance of a very good public space and very good private space is almost perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's what I see. They say, "What's your favorite city?" I say, "Charleston." And that's the reason I give. I give a technical reason. It's not that it's prettier. It's not that this. It's not that that. It's, you know, it's not that the restaurants are getting better.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that the, you know, whatever. It's not bad because it had slavery. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the balance between public and private space is excellent. It's one of the best. So,
going back to the idea of kind of a depth psychology or evolution, I mean, like, do you feel like there are ways that we are designed to interact with space that maybe are not conscious? You know, we know them when we do them, but we don't always, and we're not always aware of it. One of the things that I got interested in psychology when I was looking at a social anthropology book, and everyone assumed for a long time that humans built the first cities because it was easier, that quality of life went up, because we're in a you know, kind of a specialized modern society where everybody has a role. There's a surplus when it's industrial, but that wasn't the case in the Stone Age. In the first cities, when they actually looked at the bones, quality of life went down. But people still came together to build these things that were hardwired to build, even though there was no material benefit.
Yeah. That has been studied at a very high level, you know, with prospect, you know, living at the edge of the woods and so forth. There are archetypal studies, okay, that actually show that. And then they move on to ever more precise studies. Like, for example, how do people sit in a cafe in such a way that the shops on either side don't die, as an example, okay? And then, of course, the ultimate and it really is archetypal, don't underestimate this, is the way that shopping mall developers manipulate you.
Mm-hmm.
Every possible, whether it be the soundtrack, which is in some cases extremely exciting, whether it be the lighting, which is, you know, humans are like moths, whether it's the manipulation of the springtime smell, whether it is the manipulation of the spring, you know, just the degree of dryness and temperature of the air, whether, you know, how you circulate from left to right.
They're trying to create a spiritual experience. I mean, advertising is the new mythology, consumption is the new spirituality, almost.
Yeah, and you are manipulated, and there are rewards, and then there are you go through the darkness. There's a boredom sets in, and then the dawn. No, I've been walked around with experts, retail experts, and it's been absolutely fascinating how what a science it is.
Yeah,
and it is a science. Yeah, and it's archetypal. It's how it isn't. It isn't that a place is. It's not enough that a place be safe. It's that the destination be meaningful and useful. Okay, it has to be also comfortable. Okay, you're comfortable in a very deep way, and comfort is now. There's one thing I have to say about archetype. Okay, the first studies were that once certain patterns were established, then they became culturally adjusted. Okay, and this is that I think is underestimated. Like, an Italian does not behave like a Frenchman, and they're both cultures. Okay, they just don't.
Yeah,
and
there's kind of a cultural and then a universal layer, you know.
Yeah, the cultural layer, and then there is in America, and this is of course the third rail. Everything is class. Okay,
and competition. To keep even if you are winning that day, you don't know if you're going to win tomorrow. So there's always the fear.
Well, you know, the best way, you know, there are very few places that you can't enter in America. Okay, very, very few lobbies. I mean, what hotel lobby doesn't let you in? Okay, they all do. What restaurant doesn't let you in? Okay, what shop doesn't let you in? Everybody lets you in, but you're made to feel either very comfortable or very uncomfortable. You don't have to bar a door to keep people out. And that is so a science. And it's called they don't call it class anything, they call it price point. It's a price point. So I guess what I'm saying is that Jung and people like that, they were onto something, and rather than being ignored, as you might have implied, it's actually been picked up on, and it turned into a science and subsequently commercialized.
Yeah.
So it's not at all that it's disappeared at all. It's actually central to the way that things are made and sold.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah. But so, I mean, I remember there was a study recently that, you know, Americans go to vacation on these places that are small, walkable cities, either in Europe or Disney World. That's where they're going. But then when you talk about living there, there's this suspicion about like that you're going to get tricked or power is going to be taken away from me. I'm going to lose something. It's like they want to go there 2 weeks a year, but not live there, not inhabit them.
Well, I think it's been by the way, a resort. The reason that you're at Seaside and the fact, I mean, we've designed 45, 50 communities, but the famous ones are the resorts. And that's because the resorts have to be utopian by definition. Okay, because what you do is you have 2 weeks vacation, you have to go to a better place than your own house. Okay, otherwise you would expensive. So resorts, because people look for what they don't have in a resort. Okay, they do. And it allows us to run experimental platforms. Our resorts are experimental platforms. We push the envelope. You've seen Rosemary and Alice Beach, right? Okay. Those are, that kind
beautiful work.
Experimentation can't be done in a full-time community. So what happens is that, yes, resorts is where people go. And one of the things they really love is walking to things that life pull together. But they also walk, for example, they also want more restaurants in a tighter radius. They also want perhaps more pristine nature more nearby. You know what I mean? It isn't just urbanism. But the fact that resorts are where people want to be is because they're better than normal places. So you're right about that. They also have the advantage in the case of new urbanism that urbanism cannot just be looked at. It isn't just about being pretty. People go to, I say, it's so pretty, I love Seaside. But it's actually, it only really impacts you when you live it from morning till night, And that's why the program at Seaside is so terrific, because it actually allows you to propagandize the experience of urbanism.
Well, and there's some resistance to making it a real town like Robert Davis wanted, that people could live in. Remember he said that he wanted a school, he wanted a church, he wanted a graveyard. And people were like, well, graveyard, you're going to make it a retirement community. We don't want, there was and it wasn't that he was trying to guide the nature of where the town went. He just wanted it to be a functioning town, not a resort.
In his case, it was autobiographical. Once he needed a place to get married, a place to live, a place to have good restaurants and a good market. He needed a place for his child to school. And then he needs to die. And so he's graveyard after all. Yeah. But it's completely autobiographical. Okay. That is nothing unusual about that. Like, people lay out places for themselves. You have the power. The Duke makes the castle and the town. And it's a very amusing thing to do. It's incredibly interesting to create a whole society when you have the chance. But it was autobiographical. It was not hypothetical. It is not about a real town. It's just, I need it, and I'm a real person.
Yeah, that's a good point.
A real person, therefore I need it. Yeah. And I have the power to do it. And of course, people fought him every step of the way. But he goes and makes it in.
When the styles that you work in, would you say that you tend towards postmodern classicism, or is there kind of a name for the? No,
I don't care what the style is. For me, style is camouflage. It just hides a lot of unpopular things like diversity, mixed use, density. Okay, like if you're going to do something that's denser than usual or more diverse than usual, both economically and in terms of mixed use. Is camouflage. You can hide anything by having a harmonious style. If this building looks like a glass box, and the apartment buildings looks like an 8-grade balconies, and the house, Hansel and Gretel, well, they're incompatible, and they're actually signaling that the thing is incredibly diverse and indeed radical. So what happens? These styles that assuage the issue, are really very powerful it's a very powerful propaganda tool
Mm-hmm.
to camouflage the very, very radical program of new urbanism.
Mm. That's an interesting point. We had talked to Leon Krier earlier. His thing is classicism versus modernism. And he feels very strongly about style. I was curious what attracted you to his work, because he had said that you had promoted him a lot early on.
Well, because what attracted me is that he actually clarified everything for us. He taught us.
Mm.
And we're very grateful. Everybody's confused about urbanism. Everything is confusion. And then a great professor, a great teacher clarifies it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the most memorable, and you're always grateful to him. I think clarity, what I provide in the public process, to a bunch of people who are frightened and confused and everything else, I just provide clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And clarity is the more than truth, actually, because you tell them you have to soften it usually.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't like it's the brutal, harsh truth that I'm letting you know. No, that ain't it. It's just, let me explain why your tax base has gone to shit. Let me explain
Mm-hmm.
why you're young, move away. Let me explain why you are isolated. Let me explain why you don't have enough money or enough time. And you clarify it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're grateful and they trust you because you've clarified something for them.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it. I mean, you're really doing group therapy a lot of the time when you're doing urban planning,
That's true. That's true. And considering how much therapy is worth, we should be paying. Like I always tell my friend Joanna Lombard, she says she has 2 meters.
Mm-hmm.
She said rate for designing and then a rate for therapy. And the rate for therapy is 3 times as much. So when people get all worked up and need therapy, she says, well, the therapy clock goes on at $300 an hour.
Well, my dad is an architect, and I remember when I was a little kid, I went to some proposal meeting in this community, and people were getting real emotional. He's a very even-keeled guy, and I was listening to what they were saying, and it was like they weren't even talking about the building. I mean, they were saying like we're sad and lonely, and we want a forum to do this, and you realize how much of that you encounter when you're not in a mental health profession, but a lot of what you're doing is mental health work to help clarify somebody's pain and give them a solution so that they know what to do that is helpful. And then on the other end, when you build a beautiful space that, makes people have a better and richer life, that does help heal society on a very, meta level.
But remember one thing, that, and this is something that's shocking, there are people who really want ugly, dysfunctional shit.
Yeah.
And they're talking them out of it. It's not that they misunderstand it. It's just that when you explain it to them, they say, I understand perfectly. I just don't want it.
Mm.
And I've seen that in preference studies. I've seen it all the time. And one of the things that I'm always warning people about urbanists is that you have to triage. You can only save 1/3 of America with decent, walkable, diverse urbanism, okay? Because there are people, there's another third of people who actually don't want to know their neighbor, and they don't even know what you're talking about. When you say, well, it's more social, I say, why want to know my neighbor?
Yeah.
Why? I love driving. I love driving my children. I love drive-throughs. Yeah, I love Walmart. Like, you can't talk them out of it. And then there's a last 1/3 that is simply, that is because buildings are intrinsically anti-urban, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in our life, and not just sewer plants and factories, okay? There's a lot in our life that is manifested in buildings that are not walkable, and they're not diverse, and it's built into them. Like, for example, a bank is not going to be full of delightful windows. It's going to have a lot of blank walls, okay? There's a place that is perhaps not noxious in terms of pollution, but there are trucks by the hundred, okay? And that's not something you want to bring into urbanism.
Mm-hmm.
You see, and if you go to cities, the difference between cities like Paris and American cities, as you drive into Paris, you will see that there's a huge belt of crap all the way around it. Mm-hmm. Okay, and a lot of that crap is the crap of the big boxes. It's the crap of the trucks. It's the crap of the things that have to be too large. Okay, it's that crap. What they do is they keep it outside. So once you penetrate into that crap and you enter Paris, it's no longer betrayed. You're never unpleasantly surprised by an unwalkable, hostile environment. The United States sprinklers it everywhere. Like, for example, even the worst city in America, let's say, started before 1900, and you say, this is devastating, it's nothing but shit. It can put, every city can put together 10 city blocks that are great, okay? They're just not adjacent. Mm-hmm. You know, first with this hostile stuff. The problem with the United States is that we do not segregate the anti-pedestrian environments. And the planners, what they try to do is they try to eliminate it. And of course you eliminate it because it is intrinsically hostile. And then you can see them crashing. You can see them saying, well, I really want to get rid of Walmart. And people come up and say, well, what's this guy talking about? That's where I shop. That's the only thing I can, you see? And so there is this understanding, very few of my buddies pick up on it, that a third of what is built is intrinsically hostile to pedestrians. And you have to allocate it. You have to triage. You can only save 1/3. And if you try to save all of it, you will make all of it mediocre. So what we do is we triage and we say 1/3 is superb and 2/3 are goners. But we don't compromise the 1/3 which is superb. And listen, there are people who just really love the life that we're against. They love it. Even when they understand it, they want it. So I don't know how built in that is. I think there's a lot of it is cultural rather than archetypal. You know, they were just brought up with drive-thrus. I can't stand drive-thru. I don't know how you eat in a car.
Well, if you've only seen that, then how do you have the imagination for a better world? You know,
you can't. And you know, one of the reason things are ugly is that if you're brought up and every single window you've ever seen in your life is badly proportioned, if you ever see a well-proportioned window, you don't recognize it. The European kids, there's enough beautiful stuff in Europe that they can tell the difference. You see, we have lost that. We do not, all these wealthy, educated people that commission total crap, you know, buildings, that's because they have no reference. That it's like you've never eaten good food, so why should you know about good food? You've never seen.
And they probably grew up in a high school that looks like a prison. You know, we build these cinder block windowless hells to put kids in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it's even more subtle because it's not as horrible as a high school. It's just that everything's badly proportioned. And so you see a well-proportioned window and they're suspicious.
Yeah.
They're suspicious. You know, it's great. It's really something. So, yeah, it's just one of these stones that's rolling downhill. And frankly, I think that, you know, we all know about the class distinctions in America. There is something that's going on now, which is, I think they're terrific cultural distinctions. You know, there are people who know about architecture and people who don't. And that's the way it is. And it's very hard to fix that.
Well, that's an interesting take. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really appreciate all of that. And I don't want to run over. I know initially it was for 15 minutes and then we got behind with the technology.
For some reason, this has been an archetypal interview. I've said these decades.
It feels like synchronicity for sure. Even the phone cutting out. Is there anything that you want to promote? You have a book coming out, or anything that people can go to if they want to find out more about your work?
Urbanation is the third best-selling book on the subject of all time. If you want to do that, it's written at a very good level and it explains everything. It's done 20 years now. Suburban Nation. It sells a lot every year. I would always send people to that. Then there are other books for designers that a very good, very well illustrated one called The New Civic Art.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm writing more specialized books. Like, for example, we did one called Agrarian Urbanism,
mm-hmm.
which is societies that grow food. It's not about growing food. It's about societies that grow food and the positive consequences of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, quite. We're now working on what I think are the most important things. The first is really affordable housing. There's not even a second in terms of importance. And then the other thing is, what happens when we realize that we're going to lose the war to climate change?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do we do then?
What happens to property values on coasts and things like that? And then where do those people want to go?
Yeah, and it will not have happened. It will not have happened, I would think, in a radical way. But suddenly you realize
mm-hmm.
that it is a it's a self-reinforcing system, that once you've gone past the threshold, it just keeps going, right? And
mm-hmm.
so what do you do when you realize that we've lost it? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And you've identified 5, you want to use the term market segments, 5 responses to it. And I'd be happy to talk to you next time about what they are.
Sure.
They have a lot of archetypal responses to crises. And they go from the ethical response, Thermopylae, holding astride the gates of fire, and dying in defense of civilization, to a very, very rational response, which is party on. We're dying, we're going to die anyways. When
mm-hmm.
you party.
Yeah.
Okay? These are not denialists. There's a lot of people who are not denialists that are nevertheless partying.
Mm-hmm.
Their party continues. And they know that climate change is a lost cause. And that is why they're partying.
Yeah.
And, it's like, for example, all around us, the number one community in development successful in the United States is Margaritaville.
Mm-hmm.
Look it up. Margaritaville is all about partying on.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting. I think the thing to do whenever you bring up a subject like, archetype and so forth, the reason that I'm not as excited as I might be about it is that I think there are multiple archetypes, for exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are archetypes, but it's not a single one. It's not like you give your back to the forest and you face out into the sunlight, to meet your enemy. That's one archetype. There are other ways.
Well, there's multiple, maybe an infinite number within the same person, which is what makes depth psychology interesting, but also people hard to wrangle and hard to understand.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's more than one, but it's not an infinite number. I try very hard to open it up, and I rarely find in fundamental things that there are more than 5 or 6 ways to do things. So yes, and I tell people, yes, it's more complicated than you think. It's more than one, but it's not an infinite number. There's maybe 5 to do it. Politically, what are the choices politically? Well, we know it's not 1 or 2, but it's also not 10.
Yeah.
And so I think that the limit, I think when you tell somebody there's an infinite number of ways, that disempowers them. And they say, well, I can't understand that shit. I'm not going to study it.
Yeah.
But look, there's really 5 fundamental ways to look at this. They can follow you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the dumb people will never follow you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to write them off. The problem is that if you're always pandering to the dumbest person, to the dumbest question in the room, what you will do before the end of the day is lose all the intelligent people.
Yeah.
And I always respond to the most intelligent people as intelligently as I can, and I lose the dumb people. And they're pissed off. They are pissed off, and they're insulted, and they say horrible things about you. Good riddance.
Well, and especially in the American South, we have such an avoidance of conflict. People keep trying to make the truth in the middle of 2 points of view that are bad, and it isn't. Sometimes you have to say, this is wrong, and this one isn't.
Well, if 1/3 of the people haven't left the room, you haven't made your point.
Yeah.
Like when we design a community and they say, well, 6 people didn't buy today. They hated it. And only 3 bought. I said, that's because we have a project of real character.
Yeah.
If everybody liked it, then you go buy, give them a catalog of one of the other things, that's for sale. So yeah, you've got to be willing. What you mentioned about the South is you have to be willing to lose sales. You have to be willing to lose friends. You have to be willing to lose a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you're going to stand for something. And what I find is that it is that being popular is a weak platform. It's very weak. But being indispensable is a really strong platform. Mm-hmm. And it's almost never the same. It's very hard to be really popular and tell people the truth they need to know. Mm-hmm. And so the people that I know that have smiley face attitudes, eventually people just turn on them. Mm-hmm. Well, I've been a very difficult person to deal with. And I'm really not. It's just that I tell them the truth. But I'm always the one that people want to interview. I'm the one that people,
sure.
We don't like work.
I say to a lot of patients, you avoiding conflict does not make you a nice person or a good person.
No. It makes you nobody, actually. It makes you an interchangeable person. They'll just find another one.
To have the integrity that you're talking about requires you to have done your own work. It doesn't have to be in therapy or it doesn't have to be in church, but there is some kind of introspection where you're not afraid of yourself. You're not afraid of judgment. Yeah. And most therapists won't do that work. I mean, when I go to a lecture and a lot of the therapists are cognitive-only therapists, and I start talking about pushing somebody into the shadow and saying in the first session, yeah, you're talking about your wife and your mistress and your boss and whatever, but that's not really what we're talking about. You can't feel, you're afraid of feeling not as good as other people. You're afraid of not feeling good. So go ahead and do that. I'm better than you. The lamp's better than you. Just feel that. Where is that in your body? And I mean, the therapists will leave. I mean, they'll walk out the door because they don't want someone to do that to them. They haven't been in that kind of therapy. But then, people want that kind of therapy. Those patients come back.
So exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly. And that goes not only for therapy, but for anything you're trying to sell. If it's interchangeable with something else, then, you can just compete on price.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's if it's going to be a Ford, I can look at a GM, I can look at this, and look at a Chrysler. But if it's going to be a Tesla, I'm not looking at anything else, and I can charge whatever I want.
Yeah,
absolutely. But you have to be willing to lose 4/5 of the potential buyers.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of nerve.
And you have to be willing to do things that are scary for a lot of people, to be misunderstood, to be judged. And the worst fear for a lot of people than being misunderstood is having somebody think that they understand you, but they're wrong, especially a creative, that's hard.
Well, I hardly know anybody, honestly. I really do feel incredibly isolated in what we're talking about.
Mm.
I have very few colleagues that will actually say that they'll go as far as I will. But I don't think I go any further than you have to go.
Well, but it's the thing that like when you're hiring therapists or you're training candidates, you can't teach that, People say like, well, I want to do brain spotting. It's this technique that we do that is very experiential. It puts people in touch with trauma really quickly. You're kind of in a fugue state. And the therapist knows I'm teaching them the technique, but the therapist is saying, wait, I can't put somebody in that much distress. I can't do that. And I'm saying, no, you have to have faith that the plane is going to land. You have to have faith that when you have to be able to make room for this amount of pain and sit with it to help them heal. And if you can't make room for it, if you're afraid of it, that means you need to go back to therapy. I can't teach you how to hold this. And that's the thing you can't teach, people. They have that because they face something or they don't.
Yeah, well, it must be getting worse because the fragility, right, of the younger people, very well what I'm talking about, right?
There's kind of a generation of helicopter parents that were able to keep their kids from having any kind of obstacle, and it's not a real life, and they don't know how to do something. Robert Polk Harrison gave a talk, and he said, I'm ready to quit teaching because kids today want Nietzsche like they want a hamburger, and what makes Nietzsche worth understanding is that you don't get it. You sit with it, that it is hard. And there's no room for that in American education anymore.
Yeah. No. Well, so I just think there have been institutions that were created that were, and there's a list, and the rulers of Europe got together on this, right? They decided to subsidize religion, subsidize public school, have a universal draft for young men that remained with their local regiment all their lives under their officers, right? To keep them going straight. The savings bank for the workers, and did I say the subsidized church? There were 5 institutions, and they took Europe, which was barbaric. Okay, Napoleonic wars, barbaric. They took the West, which was barbaric. I mean, there were Indian massacres in 1890.
Yeah,
barbaric, and they civilized it.
Yeah,
and been doing in the last 30 years is taking precisely those institutions apart, one after the other.
Because that kind of collectivism is a threat to consumerism, consumer-driven, just hyper-consumption. And you get people of a certain age in therapy, they don't understand, they can't explain to you who they are without talking about what they can buy.
My God.
I'm an artist because I have an Apple computer. I'm an individual because I get this TV at Best Buy. I'm into that, and I'm like, okay, stop talking about what you're buying. Who are you? And there's certain age, certain culture, they can't do that.
By the way, one of the most interesting things I saw was a debate between who was more right.
Mm-hmm.
You might look this up, whether it was Brave New World or 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And we often think and we fear 1984, right?
Yeah.
Dictatorship, etc. And there was a group of 5, I think it was 5 professors discussing Huxley and Orwell. And hands down, audience included, Brave New World won.
Mm-hmm.
It is the other thing that's happening.
Yeah.
It's not the dictatorship and the repression and the black slab and the eye everywhere that we've been taught to fear. It's actually the manipulation of our brains that is the winner. And it's so interesting to see.
It's not the enemy outside, it's the enemy inside,
Yeah. Oh, that's very well put. Very well put. So that is, in fact, how this fascinating debate came out. And I must say, I've got certain, I don't want to tie everything together to a single thing, but there are several things that have clarified for me what's going on, and therefore how I should behave, including the potential that I have of making a difference.
Yeah.
Which is more reduced. If you want to, for example, offer a better life, a more reasonable life, a more sensible life to a few people for a generation or 2, that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And you say, well, you're so unambitious. And I said, excuse me. You know what I'm offering here? A better life. Okay, you can't even offer a better weekend, let alone a better life, for a generation or 2.
Yeah.
You can't even keep somebody happy for a day. Like, I think I'm a megalomaniac.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking of a generation or 2. And that's what they're all thinking.
Well, so, I tell patients in therapy a lot that we have one choice under all the things that bring us into therapy, biting our nails, drinking alcohol, whatever. Underneath that, you have one choice in life. Do you look at the things that scare you and go into that and grow? Or do you run from it? And most people will choose to run. And culture works the same way. Societies work the same way. We can be honest enough to make real change, or we can kind of lie to ourselves about what the problem is and avoid.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Hey, I gotta go now.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope.